to Beyond the Forbidden. All right, today on the show, I have the man, the myth, the legend. He has the most frequent flyer miles when it comes to interviews I have done with. And I like to, he is a real good friend, and he is very knowledgeable when it comes to a lot of these things with the secret space program, alternative history, and just go to his website, exopolitics.org, and you'll find a lot of great articles and many links to his books too. We're going to be discussing some things within his newest book, which is the US Airforce Secret Space Program, Shifting Extraterrestrial Alliances and Space Force. Welcome to the show, Michael. How you doing, dude?
Aloha, Mike. Glad to be back.
Yeah, it's been about, I don't know, I would say at least 8 months, but I'm stoked, man. It's almost like I get goosebumps every time I talk to you. I feel like a fat kid in a candy store.
Well, things are happening, and I'm really glad to see stuff kind of unfolding. And, the Space Force initiative, as it's kind of making its way through the halls of Congress, is really exciting, because to me, that's the way they're going to roll out the announcement of the secret space program and what they've secretly built over decades.
So I guess I know you've been talking about the secret space program for several years, and you're one of the leading experts in the field when it comes to this topic. But because you've wrote about the Navy secret space program, and now you wrote about the Air Force secret space program. What chain of events led you or inspired you to shift from maybe the Navy side of things to the Air Force picture when it comes to this secret space program?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Basically, I was really tracking the kind of information about the Air Force secret space program for some time while I was doing the research on the Navy program. And as it turned out, that it seems that there was a kind of division of the spheres of responsibility, that the Navy took on the responsibility of developing a space program that would deploy in deep space, and that would basically interact with other solar systems and other civilizations out there, while the Air Force built a program that was based more on near-Earth operations with orbital space stations and anti-gravity vehicles that could service these space stations in near-Earth orbit. So there was basically a lot more sightings of the Air Force stuff as opposed to the Navy stuff, which was kind of like, big kilometer-long spacecraft that were being secretly deployed out of places like the Wasatch Mountains, like the Dugway Proving Ground. But, you get just kind of like isolated reports here and there. But the Air Force program, there was just a lot of information. And I have a contact in Florida, in Tampa Bay, near MacDill Air Force Base. And he started sending me photos of these anti-gravity vehicles over MacDill. And basically, these were flying triangles, flying rectangles. He even had cigar-shaped photos that he was sending to me. And the strangest thing about it was that he was actually being encouraged to take the photos by operatives that were associated with MacDill and with the Air Force Special Operations Group down there. So, to me, that got me interested in, well, what's the Air Force doing, and why is the Air Force wanting people to know about their anti-gravity craft, and that, they're using a place like MacDill as a launching pad for these craft to deploy, which kind of makes sense when you look at the history of MacDill and it being the home of Special Operations Command, that it's a logical place where you would actually have these kind of, covert space operations being launched that was being run by the Air Force.
And well said, Michael. And when it comes to the secret space programs, now, does the Navy and Air Force's secret space programs work alongside each other, or is it all compartmentalized, Michael?
Very much compartmentalized. The Navy knew all about the Air Force secret space program, because the Navy has its people embedded in Air Force institutions to kind of like keep track of what the Air Force has been doing. But the Air Force had no idea what the Navy was doing. And this goes to kind of like institutional kind of primacy, if you like. The Navy's been around since the formation of the American Republic. The Air Force is the baby in the block. It was only formed in 1947. And so the Navy, when all of this advanced technology was starting to get discovered and it was being developed, a decision was made that the Navy would basically work with one group of extraterrestrials, the Human Looking group, that they decided were the kind of more reliable group, and the Air Force would work with the other group, the group that had helped the Germans in their space program. And here we're talking about reptilians and greys, that the Air Force would work with those, and that the Navy would kind of like keep track of what was going on, so that one day, the Air Force would do its best to get the kind of optimal technologies from their alliance, and the Navy would do the best to get the optimal technologies from its alliance. And so basically what you had was parallel programs, which kind of like now, it makes sense that if you have conflicting extraterrestrial groups, why would you just pick one side to make agreements with? Wouldn't the logical thing be to pick both sides, work with both sides, and have within your, because the US is unique. I don't think there's any other country that actually has military services that are virtually autonomous. That the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army are virtually autonomous from each other. I mean, they each have their own departments, and so the things that happen in there are not necessarily known by the other military service. And this was really the ideal system for which the US could deal with the legacy of these different extraterrestrial groups that had, that had chosen to use the Earth as proxies during the Second World War. One group working with the Germans, with the Axis power, another group of extraterrestrials working with the Allied powers. So after the war, it made sense for the US to kind of like try to get as much as it could from both sides. And so the Navy went down one track and the Air Force went down the other track. And now what we're having is a convergence of those. And that's where Space Force comes in.
And you're exactly right. And it makes sense to work alongside both races because, as the old cliche saying goes, Michael, keep your friends closer and your enemies closer. And
exactly right.
And maybe that's something that's going on here because I would say maybe some speculation, not sure, but the Nordics are quote unquote the good guys and the reptilians are the bad guys. Is that correct?
Basically, yeah, that's the way it's played out, that the reptilians are the ones that are more manipulative and the Nordics are the ones that are more ethical.
And is that why we have so much? We discussed this before, and you talk about this many times throughout your interviews and presentations. But is that what is some of the, I guess, the chaos that's going on in the world today, and the infighting, the confusion? Because it's almost like we are the intermediaries, the ones to try to. We're stuck in the middle, I guess, because are the Nordics maybe the one huge faction here on planet Earth, and then you have with their own maybe agendas, they could be good, bad, or whatever. Then you have the reptilians' agendas here on Earth, and maybe that's why we have the left, the right. We have all this, I guess, wars and rumors of wars. What up with all the chaos, Michael? I'm trying to wrap my head around all this because it seems like we're just going down this rabbit hole, and it just seems like there's something behind the scenes that is going on. Is it these two races conflicting with each other, and we're just trying to keep them maybe on neutral grounds? What's going on, Michael?
Yeah, this has been going on for thousands of years. The Earth has been a proxy battleground for competing extraterrestrial groups. Books like William Bramley's Gods of Eden and Jim Ma's the UFO agenda. I can't remember the exact title, but both of them.
The alien agenda.
The alien agenda, thank you. Yeah, both of them actually track this conflict that has been going on for thousands of years. And the best example is basically this happened most recently during the Second World War. It happened during the Cold War, and it even is happening now with the whole war on terrorism thing. And it's easy for us to understand because we've done it ourselves. When you look at during the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States basically used Africa and South America and Asia as proxy battlegrounds, where the Americans and the Russians never actually fought against each other. I don't think there's ever been a battle where American soldiers have faced off against Russian soldiers. But in all of these areas, Asia, Africa, South America, throughout the Cold War era and up to today, you've had both sides using indigenous forces as proxies in a battle. And what happens is, questions of right and wrong become secondary to the political agenda of the major actors. Like you look at a place like Afghanistan, the US supported the Taliban or supported these Muslim jihadis in the 1970s and 80s against a secular Afghanistan regime that was, and the only reason they did it was because that secular regime was supported by the Soviets. So they basically, in the 70s and the 80s, they helped bring about the rise of Islamic fundamentalism and the Taliban. And that was because the US wanted to undermine the Soviets as much as possible, even if it meant taking down a very progressive, secular Afghanistan state that had believed in equal rights for women and education for women and all of these positive things that they still wanted to help. And so basically that's just an example of how in these proxy wars, the right thing, the ethical thing gets forgotten, and what really becomes the dominant thing is the kind of political agenda that each side is pushing. And that's where we are today. And we are seeing it right now with this war on terror thing. It's the same thing happening again and again. And so unless we get an idea of the big picture, we're going to make the same mistakes that have happened in the past.
Those who do not study and are familiar with the past are doomed to repeat. And it seems like that's what's happening here, Michael. Too many people are worried about attacking Trump or wondering what type of lipstick the Kardashians are wearing. People aren't really taking this type of exopolitical thing, especially, with what you research and others out there, serious. And it is a serious matter. And especially for the future of the human race here on Earth, because there's a deep, dark political, exopolitical agenda here that's going on. And the thing is, it's almost like people just do not care. And the thing is, I guess when it comes to movies in Hollywood, it's almost like certain factions have trickled I guess, soft disclosure through movies and films. And maybe that's a way to, I guess, subconsciously terraform our consciousness, I guess, to get us ready for maybe something to come in the future. Do you think that's what they are doing, Michael? Or do you think people are just going to be running around the streets in chaos and in fear?
Well, the future is being decided right now, with this whole thing of the censorship of social media, where basically anyone coming out with a kind of conservative pro-Trump agenda, trying to expose the deep state, they're being censored, they're being sanitized. And progressive liberals on the left side of the political spectrum, they're supportive of this. They kind of are sitting by idly, and they're happy as Facebook and Google and YouTube censor all of these kind of like more right-wing conservative Christian sites out of existence. Demonetizing and all of that. And what they're not recognizing is that once you go down this track of basically giving the major tech companies the ability or that kind of authority to be able to censor any kind of dissident voices using algorithms, using machine learning, using AI, you're setting out this kind of dystopian future where basically, what we're seeing in China with the kind of whole social credit score, that can eventually be implemented in the United States, where all of a sudden, if you say the wrong thing, you're accused of hate speech, and you're demonetized, and your website goes offline, and your livelihood is threatened. Just by even putting up a link now to something that Alex Jones puts out. Not that I support Alex Jones, but if you have a link to him now, you can actually be accused of being part of this kind of hate speech agenda and demonetized and banned, and if we don't stand up and really protect free speech on social media, on the internet, it's not going to be good in the future, because once you let machine learning, AI, and the tech companies take control of speech, and that anything that appears on the media that appears on the internet is only going to be because some major tech company is allowing it, then we're in big trouble.
And you're exactly right, Michael. What I'm about to read you. We're about to get more into your book in just a second. I posted this on Instagram last night. People go to at Beyond the Forbidden on Instagram, follow me, and also check out Michael Salla. Let me go ahead and give your link to, of course, exopolitics.org, your website. And what's your Facebook, Michael?
Just Dr. Michael Salla.
And go check out and follow his work. But anyways, on Instagram, I could have worded this maybe a little better, but it was late last night. I worked a long day, but why do so many, this is talking about fake news. Why do so many conscious people within the alternative truth community use the term fake news to attack other people within the alternative community? Do they realize that fake news is a manufactured nomenclature by the dying dinosaur lamestream media to be used as a weapon to discredit everyone who has a difference of opinion outside of their own narrative? The lamestream media want us to attack each other and keep us in a perpetual state of confusion while they sit back terraforming our consciousness with the elite's propaganda. I say F the lamestream media. We must stand and as a united community, no matter our differences of opinion. We are the future, and they are terrified because we are winning this war on information. Their days are numbered.
Yep, totally. I agree with that. Absolutely. That's what's happening now. And fake news that was designed to basically take down the alternative media and make the mainstream media the go-to place for anyone wanting to get their news. And it hasn't worked, but nevertheless, they are still trying very aggressively to paint anyone with an alternative voice out there as part of this kind of fake news narrative.
So back to your book, the US Airforce Secret Space Program, Shifting Extraterrestrial Alliances and Space Force. You can get this book off his website, exopolitics.org, or you can go to Amazon and buy his book. But I think what I'm about to read you, this is either chapter 3 or chapter 4. I took a screenshot because I had the Kindle version, Michael. But it's a document. I think it says majestic only scientific probabilities. I'm going to read from 2 to, I guess, 6. Interplanetary space travel is possible provided adequate funding, necessary resources are made available, and national interest is, I can't see that word because it's an old document. Our solar system is not unique. Chances are favorable for intelligent life on other planets, withstanding similar development, net unlike our own. Being that our culture is relatively young in relation to the cosmic scale, it is possible that other cultures may have developed faster or are much older and have avoided the pitfalls common in our historical and scientific development. This is what I liked right here, Michael, and I'll ask you here in just a second about this document, but human origins may not be constructed to one planet. Our gene, I think it says our genius may be, our genes, I think, maybe, if it's hard to see it, may be found among solar systems similar to our own. The laws of physics and genetics may have a genesis in a higher structured order than once previously thought. That is mind-blowing, Michael. Where did you find this document?
I believe that's the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the majestic documents. Basically, that was a leaked document, and it was very likely from the files of James Jesus Angleton, who ran the counterintelligence division within the CIA from the 1950s up until the early 1970s. And it really is mind-blowing, because the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit did exist. It was set up during the Second World War by the Army, by Army Intelligence, G2, and it was basically getting as much information as possible about the flying saucer phenomenon, and trying to understand where they came from. And as they learned, as the Army Intelligence learned, and later the Air Force was created out of the Army Air Corps, basically they reached those conclusions that, you know, we're being visited, that extraterrestrial genetics are something that are very similar to our own. And in fact, I believe, and my research basically has shown, that we are an amalgam of 22 different extraterrestrial genetics. This is what different contactees and whistleblowers have said. There have been, over the last 500,000 years, 22 different extraterrestrial races who have come in and altered the genetics of humanity in some way, to create the different ethnic groups. So, you know, when we look at the black, the white, the red, the brown races, each of those has slightly different genetics, and that can be traced to these different extraterrestrial groups.
Well said, Michael. Um, and also within your book, of course, these chapters, they're, I can't wait to read the whole thing. But what are some of these secret agreements with? You have this on your page where you're now available. Your book is now available on your exopolitics.org website. Talk about secret agreements with a breakaway German colony in Antarctica, the Fourth Reich, and the different extraterrestrial groups in the 1950s. Elaborate a little bit more on that, Michael.
Right. Well, what you had was that the Germans basically, they were able to survive the Second World War because they were being helped by a reptilian species. And during the 1940s and the 1950s, the US Navy and the US Air Force tried to deal with this German presence in Antarctica, building this secret space program down there with advanced technologies, and them being helped by this reptilian group of extraterrestrials. And eventually the decision was made that the Air Force would basically be the lead institution for liaising with this German group out of Antarctica and with the extraterrestrials that they were working with. So agreements were made in the 1950s involving the Eisenhower administration. And so the Air Force was heavily involved in those agreements. The meetings were held at Air Force bases, and the Air Force basically took the lead in forging those agreements with the German group out of Antarctica and their extraterrestrial allies, with the hope that through that agreement they would get as much technology as possible, so that the US could catch up to the Germans, because it was understood by both the Navy and the Air Force that the Germans, at the end of the Second World War, while they lost the war, they had actually achieved a remarkable technological success with the development and the deployment of these flying saucer craft in Antarctica and in South America. And so basically, the Germans were very successful in reverse engineering some of these advanced extraterrestrial technologies that were being helped. And so the Air Force wanted to kind of leverage that, and so that they could build a similar fleet. And so while they had agreements, and while they did receive help from the Germans, they never got that kind of like the latest technology. They got the kind of hand-me-down technology, if you like, from the Germans. So they never caught up. And so by around 2017, the Navy program, in contrast, because they had worked with this kind of more ethical group of human-looking extraterrestrials, the Navy program had made remarkable progress. They had built these huge kilometer-long space carriers, and they were deploying space battle groups in deep space and in other solar systems. So the Navy had achieved something very close to what we see in Star Trek, while the Air Force was kind of languishing far behind with kind of like these stealth space stations in Earth orbit and the delivery systems using anti-gravity craft for them and being able to make flights to the moon and maybe to Mars. But that was about it as far as the Air Force could do. So the Air Force learned about this, and the Air Force hierarchy made the decision that they needed to basically change their alliances, that it was no longer feasible for them to continue working with the Fourth Reich and their reptilian allies, and they began to work with this human-looking group. And in the book, I provide some documents and different sources showing how and why the Air Force decided to do this.
Well said, Michael. And thank you for elaborating a little bit more on that, because I know you briefly discussed it earlier in the show. And okay, I interviewed John Lear last week, and we all know how, John, he has a lot of theories out there, but one he has claimed and held on to is that, I'm paraphrasing, that America is the Fourth Reich Kingdom or something like that. He believes that the Nazis are running America. Now, what is your thoughts on that, Michael? Because that's kind of been going on. It's not really just his theory, I guess, because that's Jim Morris talked about it, the Fourth Reich. What's your thoughts on that, Michael?
I think that's substantially correct. That ever since Eisenhower gave his warning in 1961, and then you had the Kennedy assassination in 1963, the Fourth Reich has been basically running the United States. And when we say that, we need to kind of keep in mind that the Fourth Reich is this kind of German group out of Antarctica that has worked very closely with global elites and also with transnational corporations. So they are kind of part of, people call it the deep state, some call it the cabal, some call it the Illuminati. Basically it comprises different factions. And the Fourth Reich is one of those factions, but the Fourth Reich in the United States got an enormous amount of leverage and control because they had so penetrated the military-industrial complex to the point where I think what Jim Mars and John Lear have said is substantially accurate. That when we look at the major corporations and the major media, these are all linked in some way to the Fourth Reich, to the deep state, to the kind of cabal, the Illuminati, and really what stands between a kind of new world order that is dominated by this kind of Fourth Reich, deep state alliance is, I really think it's basically the US military. They're the only powerful institution in the United States, because Russia also is very much against this, and so. But in the United States, it's the US military that really is standing its ground, and it does not want the United States to be absorbed into a new world order, where basically eventually the US military would be abolished and absorbed into a global military service, and that would be the end of the American Constitution and the American Republic, and the Navy in particular, the U.S. Marines, the Army, the Air Force. They all are opposed to that to varying degrees, and the Navy in particular. So it's not surprising that when you look at Donald Trump, when he first came to power, that he surrounded himself with Marine generals, that they were his national security advisors, Secret Service running the Pentagon, that these were Marine generals. And now we have kind of like those Marine guys being moved out, and now we're seeing the Army guys come in. So you have these senior Army officials now taking these positions to help Donald Trump with his administration counter this kind of deep state, Fourth Reich effort to basically absorb the United States into this new world order. And so, yeah, I'm supportive of that effort.
And I've talked to many people about that, and people, there's no way that the Nazis or the Fourth Reich is running America. Okay, let's say not physically. Okay, let's just say not physically. Their ideological agendas. I'm not going to say that 20 times, but their agendas, their ideologies are present, and the Nazi ideology that is what is being pushed. Am I correct, Michael?
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it's the ideology is what's being pushed here, and we can look at, say, the going back to the days of NASA, when you actually had all of these German scientists running the Apollo program, and running the Skylab program to begin with. These were Germans out of the Marshall Space Flight Center. That's a fact, a historical fact, that the two primary institutions that were involved in the kind of like the development and the deployment of the Apollo missions and of the Skylab missions were the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Kennedy Space Center, and both of those were run by German paperclip scientists, both of those institutions. And there were many Germans that had also risen to prominent positions in the corporatocracy in the United States. That was in the 60s. Now, like that was 50 years ago. But in the intervening 50 years, there has been this kind of steady infiltration into all aspects of the corporatocracy of this kind of German Fourth Reich influence, where even though it may not be someone who is by blood a German, ideologically they are in alignment with that. And when you look at the German space program, what they've been able to achieve in terms of secret facilities on Mars, on the Moon, and the asteroid belt and beyond, it can be very tempting for any corporation to kind of like sign on to and to be part of that effort, to be part of this effort to kind of like become this kind of space corporate entity and reap enormous profits.
And well said, Michael. And before we round things up for this time, I want to touch a little bit on the moon. And of course, it seems like the moon's getting a lot of attention, Michael. And just and one thing that got thrown in my driveway today is a magazine that it's free here in Louisiana is Bayou Life. Okay. But on the back, it's just a lot of little things like this, Michael. Reach for the moon. Of course, it's Blue Moon, the beer, but reach for the moon. And there's a lot of things like this that is being pushed in the media, I guess, because it's the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing. But what is this push? Why is there so much attention with the U.S. government and mainstream media for us going back to the moon, Michael? Especially after 50 years since us going back to the moon. What is going on here?
Well, there seems to be a couple of things going on at this very moment. One is this kind of push to really get a lot of space entrepreneurs up and running in having missions to the moon. We're having all of these companies, space companies, SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and the Origin, Blue Origin, and many companies that are being set up to basically launch missions into outer space and to the moon, set up space mining, and there's a push to kind of like have corporations take the lead in this, and NASA kind of play this role of being like a service entity to provide scientific know-how and all of that. And I think that's a dangerous thing, because what it's going to do is it's going to establish the primacy of corporations in space, where official entities like NASA are really kind of like just going to provide the logistics and the support for these corporations to, establish bases on the moon, to mine asteroids, to establish this presence out there. And the danger there is, if we have all these corporations out there doing all these space missions, there's no accountability for what corporations do. There's very little transparency, and they can maintain secrecy. And the countervailing attempt at that at the moment is this idea for Space Force, where you actually have the US military set up Space Force as a branch of the military, which to begin with, it'll be established under the Department of the Air Force, but the plan is in the future to make it a separate department that combines both Air Force, Navy, and other kind of military service space programs. But at the moment, it's all about the Air Force consolidating all its services, all its programs under this Space Force, so that you can establish a presence in space to do all of these things, and to kind of like oversee what's really happening in space. Because there's going to have to be a balance here. There's going to have to be a balance in terms of like, some sort of government entity. If we're talking about Space Force, if we're talking about NASA, to have a presence in space that kind of oversees what the corporations are doing. Because if we just give space over to corporations, it's going to be really bad. We're not going to know what's going to happen out there, and the corporations are very closely tied in with the German program. So I think Space Force is this effort to kind of like bring that, bring this idea of a kind of like a constitutional republic, as it projects its technologies and peoples in outer space, to kind of have those values reflected in what's happening in outer space. And I think that's a positive thing, and we want to support that, and we want to find the right balance.
Exactly, and well said again, Michael. Because with all these private corporations and the that are going to the space. Now, the thing is with that, it can be very dangerous if it's not, I guess, tightly, I hate to use the word controlled, but because here's the thing. Let's say that these corporations and rogue elements within the government or other governments in the world, they are having these under the table agendas with these privatized corporations that are out in space. And then who's knowing what's going on then? And then let's say something bad happens, something nefarious that it actually gets on, is all over the internet, and the consciousness of everybody, it knows about whatever's going on. Let's say they are experimenting on people on Mars. They probably are, but let's just say. But and then the government, all they have to say, we had nothing to do with that. They're a private corporation, so let's move on to the next corporation. Any buyers, So pretty much the government has clean hands no matter what, because they have these corporations working for them. So if any dirty work is done, the government is not going to admit it. It's going to be all on the corporations that are out there, even though they were working alongside under the table with the government.
Right. So yeah, it's a very dangerous period that we're entering into here. It really is kind of like almost like the discovery of the Americas in the 1600s and 1700s. There were different models. One model was the Spanish colonial model, which was basically they just, the Spanish crown would assert direct authority over different areas of the Americas. And the British model was a different one, where they basically gave these corporate entities the contracts to be able to establish territories in different parts of North America and to establish these colonies that way. So there were different models, and we saw how that played out in the Americas. And now space is the new frontier, where all of a sudden it's like, well, what's going to happen in terms of mining on the moon, on Mars, the asteroid belt, and so forth, and who's going to take control? Is it going to be a state, a particular state, Russia, China, the US, establishing authority? Is it going to be a corporation? All of these things are going to be mapped out at the moment. And there's pros and cons for going either way, but we really need to promote as much transparency and accountability as possible. And so that means that we really need to have, government and military institutions involved from the get-go, because, at the moment, they are the most transparent and the most accountable entities that exist. In the US, you as a taxpayer, as a voter, you can make any military government official accountable for their actions. But you can't do that when it comes to a corporation. You have to be a shareholder, and even then the shareholders are kept in the dark. So, that's where we need to basically make sure that space isn't just given over to corporations, that, governments and military need to, be involved, so that the kind of values that we embrace through the Constitution, um, that is something that's extended out into space operations.
Well said, Michael. And that is a perfect way to stop for this point, for this time. And I will have you on. We can just dive more into your book, the US Air Force Secret Space Program, Shifting Extraterrestrial Alliances and Space Force. But I guess your website, exopolitics.org, and Amazon is some of the few places you can buy this book.
Yeah, you can go to those places. You can also get it at Barnes and Nobles, Ingram distributors. You can go to your local bookstore and ask them to order copies for you. It'll be brought in there. So there's the different ways that you can order it, and just going to the website's a great way to kind of like find out what the latest is. And I'm looking forward to some big changes ahead as we get the kind of whole Space Force initiative moving forward, and the prospect of disclosure of the secret space programs comes up much more closely.
Exactly, and this book is doing really good on Amazon. Correct? It's like one of the tops when it comes to, I guess, the secrets or the UFO topic, I believe, or secret space program.
That's right. Yeah, it's been number one for some time, ever since it's released. So in the UFO category, it's up there, either number one or in those top 2 or 3 positions. So I'm really happy that people are enjoying it and buying it and recommending it to friends. And I think this often is the way disclosure happens. It's through the grassroots initiative. It's through people buying a book and recommending it to their friends, to family, and that's how you get disclosure happening. It is a slow, rapid process, but ultimately that's how it happens. And once you're awakened, you're awakened. You don't need the government to officially announce anything, because you already know. So hopefully my book plays that role in helping awaken other people. And thanks, Mike, for having me on the show and bringing these issues to your audience.
And until next time, aloha, my friend, and you have a good one.
Ahoy ho.